Hello, this is your color correction instructor, Taz Talley, and in this video, I'd like to show you how to primarily use histograms to help adjust and correct the tone and color in an image. We're going to use our lighthouse image that we've used in some of the previous videos, and I'm going to start off like I always do by making a duplicate copy, and we're going to call this working like I always do, and this saves the original file from any damage whatsoever. And we create a working.psd file, native Photoshop file. And the other thing this does is it gives us a CNC image, right? The ability to look on screen and see the before and then see an after if we want to. So it's just part of my old Photoshop skill and training back when we didn't have non-destructive tools, but I still use it. I always like to work on copies of images. Okay, so of course we're going to bring up our color correction tools. And remember, we talked in earlier videos about developing a workspace. I've got my color correction workspace, and if it doesn't come up just the way you want it, or things are a little cattywampus, you can always just choose, reset your color correction. You have the same name there, workspace, and it just moves everything exactly where you set it. And you have the same tools in the same place all the time. It really reduces fatigue, and it really increases the efficiency of your workflow. Okay, so let's dive right in and start evaluating our image. If you've worked with previous videos, we've done some of this already. The overall tone, we see that there's very little data from the highlight down to about 40% gray. It's just all missing. Most of the data is from the midtone to the shadow, and that's true on all three channels. Remember, this is the composite channel, the grayscale channel, which is the composite of the three individual red, green, and blue channels. And just to remind you, remember that all these channels are nothing but grayscale. We're adjusting the grayscale, and then the color is created on output. So we see that we have a dark image, and it's low contrast, and that's because only about half the data field is filled in with data, from about 40% down to close to 100. So we're missing everything from 0 to 40. That's why it's dark. And that's why the contrast is low. We also, and that's the tone evaluation. For the color evaluation, when we look at these histograms, you can see at a glance. It doesn't really take an ace, or haven't had to look at this for very long, or worked with histograms very long to see that this blue channel, the data in the blue channel, sticks out to the right of the red and the green. That's almost always a good indication that, hey, there's a blue color cast in this image. Looks like the red and the green are pretty similar to each other, and the blue is certainly offset to the right. So that indicates a blue color cast. And we can come over here, and we've got our eyedropper tool set. We've got it set to a 3x3 average up here, which is a good general average. And we can look at our RGB values, and we'll look at the RGB values here in the info panel. Choose something we think is supposed to be neutral, like this white area on the lighthouse. It may not be perfectly white, but it's probably pretty close. We see 80, 83, 91. Sure enough, we've got the blue color cast, so that confirms that. And we've done all this before. I'm just kind of reviewing. So how do we go about making these adjustments or changes that we want? Now, we started our discussion evaluation by talking about tone, because the lack of tone in the highlight to midtone is so obvious. And then we talked about the color, but when we actually do the adjustment, we want to do color first. And that's because when we make an adjustment, as you'll see, it adjusts the distribution of the data in the three channels. If we do tone first and then color, we end up having to redo the tone because we're adjusting the tone on all three channels after we adjust the master channel. So always do color first. What are we going to use to adjust these? Well, we're going to come over here into our layers panel. And I very often will make a duplicate layer here, okay? And we'll call this the color correction layer. And obviously we're going to do some tone too, so we'll call this. And I like to be very explicit about what I'm doing. I name my layers, so color correction and tone adjustment, and then I can turn off my background layer, and then I can return to it anytime that I want to. Again, I'm kind of anal about protecting my images and protecting my layers, but just something to keep in mind. All right, so this is going to be our actual layer that we're going to adjust. We've turned this one off, but we've maintained it. And we're going to go down here, and we're going to use an adjustment layer. We're going to always use adjustment layers because they're non-destructive editing tools. Anything you do with them doesn't get applied to actually save as or export an image and then apply the layers and the adjustment layers. Lots of different adjustment layers. My favorite, the one I use the most of, is curves. I don't use levels. Everything I can do in levels, I can do in curves and a whole lot more. And a lot of things that I might do with exposure, for instance, or hue or saturation or color balance, I still do with curves. It gives me the most control. So now I'm not saying don't use these other adjustment layers, they're fine, but I'm going to show you how to get control of your tonal distributions on all your channels using this very powerful tool. And one of the reasons why curves is so powerful is you see it has control of tonal data on the master curve and the individual channel curves across the entire tonal range, red, green, and blue. And remember, you can access all these channels with a keyboard shortcut. You can see the keyboard shortcuts right here. This is Option or Alt 2 through 5 for accessing the curves, the individual curves in the master curve in the curves panel. That's different than the Command or Control, 3, 4, and 5, where we access the colors looking at in the channels panel. So the keyboard shortcut's just a little bit different. Probably won't be using the channels all that much, so you can kind of commit the Option of the Alt and then 2 through 5 for accessing the master and the individual channels when you're working in the curves adjustment layer. Now notice, and just to review, I've got the properties panel underneath and attached to grouped with the layers panel. That is, regardless of whatever I click on here, right, the controls for that will automatically appear in the properties panel. That's where I like to do that. And I've paired up my histogram with my info panel, right? And remember how we paired those up is I just take like the info panel and I just, oops, here we go. I take the info panel, let's say it's separate, and I snug it up until it turns blue, the edge, right? And then they're connected together. Right? And that's because this gives me information about the content of my tonal data. This is histogram, which is a visual representation, and then the info panel is the RGB numeric representation. So information about contents, and then this is all adjustments over here. So I'm going to make my curves adjustment layer, and as I mentioned, always want to do color first and then tone. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by just reviewing that. Remember, we have a blue color cast. And we know that it's blue, and we confirmed it by looking at the RGB values, because the blue is offset to the right of the red and the green. So what we want to do is we want to match these three channels up, the distribution of the channels, all three of them up together, so that the highlight starting points in all three channels is about the same. So let's go first to the blue, and we'll go Option and 5. And notice that we're really not going to be working down here. We're going to be working on the highlight end. Notice if we drag the highlight end, it just exacerbates the difference. Do you see how it makes it even more blue as we drag this over? And by the way, notice how dynamic the histograms are. When I drag this highlight of the blue, that just increases the blue color cast, and notice the image actually gets visually bluer as we see over here. So we don't want to adjust the blue channel. We don't want to pull that down. And we really don't want to work in the middle of the curve. We can make these adjustments just working on the highlight end of the red and the green. So let's go. I'm going to do this all manually so you can be sure to follow. Option 3 or Alt 3 will take you to the red channel if you want to do a keyboard shortcut. Then if we move the red channel highlight and watch the red channel histogram here. I'm doing this all just visually. I'm going to drag the highlight slider and notice how the red channel starts to move over to the right, starts to get distributed. So let me just do that again. I'm just grabbing the highlight slider and just moving the red channel over until we think that visually the red channel is pretty close to where the blue is. Instead of starting with the red, if you wanted to, since it's the next one up, you could actually go to the green, all right? And then this might be a little bit easier to line things up. You can line the green up with the blue and then the red up with the green. So let's do that. So I'm going to just pull this over until that moves that green over. We're just doing it visually, right? So now it's pretty close to each other. And then we'll go to the red channel. Here we go. We'll do the same thing, pull that highlight while we monitor the red histogram and move that over. And just in our mind's eye, we can kind of draw that right down here and say, now they're lined up pretty well. Look pretty good. And we can confirm this by, again, if we go over with our eyedropper tool and look at our values, 87, 91, 92, right? And we can look at it in a couple of places, 86, 85, 87. Heck, they're within 1% of each other, right? Pretty darn good. And so we've done a color correction on this image then. Now notice this, that I can turn this off and on by just, there's before and there's after. Watch the image and the histograms. Notice that they'll both change as I turn on and off the visibility. And you can see how the image gets warmer because we reduce the blue color cast, and the histograms go unaligned to aligned. And we can do the same thing down here if we want to, right? We can turn off the visibility and on the visibility, the impact, by just clicking down here if we want to. You can see, and I typically don't use this. I'll use this up here because I don't get the impact on the histograms, right? Whereas this, when I turn this off and on, I get both the visual impact and the change in the histograms. Okay, so we've done our color, and we can see it's warmer. We've got rid of some of that harsh blue color cast by lining up our histograms. Now, if we just want to do color correction, right, we're done, right? But this image begs for some tonal adjustment. Now, we can just go to our master histogram and start to make adjustments there, right? So, for instance, we could do, and when you go to master histogram, you can see the changes that you've made with the underlying curves show up on the master view. I can dramatically lighten this image by distributing the tone by moving this over here like this. I'm going to take my highlight slider and I'm going to move it from right to left and watch the image and watch the distribution of the histograms. Notice how everything is very dynamic. Right? You know, at this point I'm saying, wow, that's pretty cool, right? And then I can turn this off and on, and I can see the change in the color and the tone. But you know, I'm thinking, what if I wanted to separate the tone and the color so I could turn one off and leave the other on and see the impact? We can do that. So notice that you can do all of this in just one curves. You can do the individual color adjustment working on the 3 channels, and then do the tone adjustment, brightness, contrast, working on the master channel. Or, and this is what I like to do, because I like control, is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to double click up here, and I'm going to call this color correction, CC, right? And then I'm going to add another adjustment layer, a curves adjustment layer, and that's right, I'm going to call this B and C, right, for brightness and contrast. Or you could call it tone, whatever you want. That way I know that this is what I use to adjust the color, and then this one I use to adjust the tone. There's absolutely no difference in terms of the quality of the image or the images as a result of using 2 adjustment layers, but you just separate the 2 adjustments. Now, let's come up here, down here rather, and let's drag our histogram highlight slider and monitor the movement of the histograms and the visual impact on the image. We're really focusing on the histograms because what we want to prevent is from going too far, right? We're coming over here and we start to get these spikes on the highlight end, indicating we're getting blown out areas in our image, which we don't want. So what we can do is this, is we can move the highlight slider till it comes close to the beginning of the uptick of the data and just watch to see that, particularly on the master histogram, that we don't get any spikes. And notice that now we can adjust the tone. We can look at the impact of the tone, right? And or the color. We can keep the color cast and just adjust the tone. So if we decided, hey, we like the blue color cast, but we wanted to just adjust the tone, we can do them separately, or we can turn them both on together. So we've dramatically improved the overall brightness of the image just by doing that. But you know, overall the image is still a little bit dingy, isn't it, right? That's because so much of this tonal data is still, even though we've spread it out quite a bit, you know, there's still a lot of tonal data, particularly in the darker areas, that just aren't showing up very well. All right, so there's a couple of things we can do here. I can do an overall brightness adjustment by just taking the mid-tone area and just pulling this up. And notice it has a dramatic impact on the image. Right? So we can just do a simple, this is just an overall brightness adjustment. And again, we're monitoring our histograms to make sure we don't get too far to the right, but it overall lightens the image. And let's do a before and after again, before and after our adjustment. So I like the overall brightening, but it's not enough for me. I don't want to go too much in the midtone, but I'd really like to bring out some of the detail of the 3/4 tone to shadow. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to put a control point. Just a minute ago, I just clicked and dragged and that creates a control point there. I'm going to put a control point right down here. Notice this little spike right here? I'm just going to put a control point, click on the master curve, and then just use my up arrow to move this up. And let's go back down and watch the histogram and watch the 3/4 tone shadow area of this image as I move that control point up. Watch it visually. Big improvement. Look at that. Look how this whole, all the detail is now coming out in through here. Here, let me make this adjustment just manually. All right, you can see the impact on that 3/4 tone to 3/4 tone to shadow. All right? So nice improvement there. Now sometimes when you make a large adjustment in a specific tonal area like this, you may get some dramatic changes along the curve, and you can just bring those into alignment, right, by just putting a couple more control points along here. Or we can come up here and go, you know what, I think I'm just going to click here and I'm going to just overall brighten that midtone just a little bit more. And again, we can keep doing this before and after, before and after. And I can say, well, I like what I'm seeing, but I'm a little concerned about getting too much adjustment here, so I can just smooth this out a little bit if I want to. And by the way, I'm just clicking and dragging here. Let me give you a little keyboard shortcut. If I hit the plus key on my keypad, watch these control points here. When I click on one, that means I can edit it, right, with my up and down arrow. But when I hit my plus sign on my keypad, it changes the control point. And you see the little crosshair? That'll tell you which one is active. So I can move along and I can go shift plus, I can go minus and move backwards. All right, I can go plus and move forwards. So I can do all these adjustments just working with my keyboard. And I really like doing that, not having to point, click, hold, and drag. And I can click, add another control point right here, right in this tonal area, and increase the brightness of the overall image. And we can keep going back and forth here. We'll go before and after, before and after. And if I decide, you know, I'd like to do a little bit more lightening down here in the 3/4 tone to shadow, and I'm just going to move that 3/4 tone point to the left a little bit and then up. And oh, I like that. I like the way that looks. Really bringing out some of that shadow detail in there. And then, at any point, if I think, the highlight end of the image is getting a little bit out of control, I can just use my plus and minus sign and go up there to the highlight control point, and I can move that to the right. Watch the histograms get a little bit darker. I can increase the contrast in the sky. I think you're getting the point about why I really like to use curves, right? I can get complete control over my entire tonal range of distribution by putting control points and then adjusting them. Can have my way with my file, by golly. So I'm lightening specific tonal areas of my image, darkening others if I want to. And notice at any point I can take this and turn it off, turn it on. I can turn the color off and on if I want to. So yeah, very, very handy to be able to have two adjustment layers. And notice that since we made our color adjustment first, all the tonal adjustments we've been making have no impact on the color balance whatsoever. The relative positions of all the data points in the three channels remain exactly the same because we did our color first and then did our tone. So one of the things that kind of mentioned is that notice you can select two of these adjustment channels and come up here and choose new group from layers, all right? And then I can call these adjustments, right? And what this allows me to do is to turn both of those off and on at the same time. So look, watch the histogram. Boom, start, and then there's both adjustments. You can still turn one or the other off, right? But creating a layer group like this really gives you lots of control over your layers, and you can help organize things. So there we go. There's a color and tone adjustment working in Photoshop using histograms. And we just checked ourselves a little bit, right? But by looking at potential neutral areas, 170, 174, 175, right? The 162, 167, 160. And if you wanted to fine tune things a little bit, you can always go into like the red channel. If you think that, the red is, a little bit too high or too low, you can go at any time, you can go back into, the red channel, and you can, adjust that red channel, make it higher or lower, whatever you like to do, to change the RGB balance and anywhere that you have in your image. So, one other thing I wanted to mention to you is notice how all the data is breaking up here. That's because this is an 8-bit image. This is why we like to shoot in RAW, camera RAW. Instead of having 8-bit image, have 12, 14, or 16-bit images. That way, when you come in, you start to make adjustments like this. We were spreading basically about 130 tones across the 256 scale spectrum, which is how many shades of gray we have in an 8-bit image. By having to stretch that out so much, we've had a little fragmentation of our data, particularly in the 3/4 tone. But if you start with a camera raw image, you can do this kind of adjustment and not end up with so much fragmentation. So there we go. Color and tone evaluation and adjustment, working primarily with histograms. And this is what I call, the 80-20 adjustment, where I can very quickly and easily, I've taken a lot of time to talk my way through this, but you can make these adjustments lickety-split, really just in a matter of seconds, particularly the color, and the overall brightness and contrast using curves, and all of this is completely non-destructive. So moving forward, we're going to continue to use histograms to help us evaluate and monitor our adjustments, but we're going to add in a lot more numeric adjustments using RGB values. We're going to add color sampler points and color control points to channels. So lots more fun and excitement with color correction coming up.